Okay, so let's now consider the restrictions that we've been given here. Let's zoom out. And the first thing we need to determine is which restrictions are kind of going to impact us and which ones aren't going to impact us. So that's going to be the first important thing we need to determine. All right, so let's read through them and figure out which of these are going to impact us and which of these aren't. So it says, Baby Spice must complete activity B. So here's activity B. Baby Spice has to do that. Now, that doesn't really restrict us in any way, so we don't have to even consider it. It says Sporty Spice must complete activities D and E. All right, so Sporty Spice needs to do activity D and activity E. Now, that is going to impact us because, look, these things are happening at the same time. So they have to do D and E. That's going to impact us. So we'll come back to that. That's something we have to consider. Ginger Spice must complete activities C and G. So Ginger Spice has to do C and G. Well, those aren't happening at the same time. You know, she can do C and then be ready later on to do G. So that is not going to impact us. What about Posh Spice? I think that's the one married to David Beckham. Must complete activity F. Okay, activity F. Again, that doesn't impact us because it's just one thing, right? It's just one thing. Activity F, you know, it doesn't impact us. She just has to do it. So go away, Posh Spice. Go back to David Beckham. All right, Scary Spice must complete activities J and I. All right, well, that's going to impact us because J and I are occurring at the same time. So that is something we have to consider. Anyone can complete activities A and H. Okay, again, that doesn't impact us. Okay, now what we have to do, it says with these conditions, what is the minimum time it will take for the Spice Girls to be ready for their concert? So that means before we said the earliest completion time was going to be 18, well, that's not going to be the case because now we've got all these restrictions happening here. So we have to kind of consider those restrictions to figure out what the minimum time it is going to complete all of these things. The first thing we need to consider is that Sporty Spice must complete D and E. So let's think about that for a second. We've got D and E here, and she has to complete both of them. Well, the first thing that we're going to think of for a second, and let me grab an orange here, is which of these do you begin first? Do you begin D first, or do you begin E first? Well, D has the earliest start time of 4, so obviously you start 4 first. So you're starting 4, and you're going along 4, but, you know, this is stopped here. Nothing is happening here because Sporty Spice needs to finish D, and then once she's finished D, now she can come back and do E. So how much time does this add on to us? Well, it's going to add on an extra 3 minutes because it's only until we finish this can she come back and do that. Hopefully that makes sense. So that means our earliest start time to do activity G isn't going to be 10, rather it's going to be 13, which means we would go 13 plus 1 is going to end up being 14 for this one. It's going to mean that activity I can only begin at 14 minutes. All right, let's now come back to this one. We have considered this, so let's just put a line through it. We've now considered it. Then it says Scary Spice must complete activities J and I. All right, so what does that mean? That means that she has to do this one, I, and this one, J. Well, which one would she do first? Well, hopefully you can see that she would do this one first. She would start I, and as she's doing I, someone else would be doing H. So she's doing I, someone else is doing H, but then what has to happen is that they have to wait here until she's finished with I, until this person, Scary Spice, can come back and finish J off. So that means we need to add an extra 5 minutes onto this thing, don't we? We have to add an extra 5 minutes onto it in order for this thing to be finished. So let's really consider this for a second. So we're at 14, and then at 14, we then say, all right, she takes 6 minutes. So we're at 14. She takes 6 minutes to complete I, and then they're waiting here for us because she then has to come and finish 5. So finish J, which is 5 minutes. So that's going to be 14 plus 6 is 20, plus 5 is 25. So that means the minimum time it takes to complete this is 25 minutes. And that is our answer. Our answer is 25. If we now look at the solution that Edrolo gives us, not Vika, Edrolo, you can see here the Spice Girls take 25 days to be ready. Let's now read through the explanation that they give to us to really solidify this in our brains a bit more. So it says the minimum completion time without restriction is 18 days. And that's what we figured out. Remember, when we came up here, we said, without restrictions, it takes us 18 days to finish it. Perfect. Then it says Baby, Posh, and Ginger Spice will not alter the minimum completion time. So those are the ones that we crossed out in red. So that's Baby, Ginger, Posh, do not impact it. Baby, Ginger, Posh, do not impact it. And that's because none of those were, the same person had to complete an activity that were both occurring at the same time. Okay, because Sporty Spice must complete activity D before starting activity E, the early starting time of activity G and H is increased to 13 days. This increases the EST of activity I to 14 days. So let's just break that down. So it says activity G and H is increased to 13 days. So if we come here, remember that's what we said. Before activity G can happen, or G and H, before G and H can happen, we've added on an extra 13 days onto it because we had to add on this 3 here. Because remember, only after she finished D could she come back and finish E, and that added on an extra 3 days because nothing was happening here. She had to come back to finish it off. So that now makes it that G and H could not start until 13 days. And then we said, all right, in order for I to happen, we had to add on the 1 from G, and that got us to 14. 13 plus 1 is 14. That's that 14 there. And that's what this statement says as well. This increases the earliest start time of activity I to 14. All right, hopefully this is making sense. This is a tricky question, so hopefully you're holding on. Then it says, Scary Spice must complete the activity I before starting activity J. Scary Spice will complete activity I on day 20. By that time, activity H would be complete. Scary Spice would be free to complete activity J. Activity J will be complete after 25 days. Again, a lot of words there, so let's go through it slowly. Scary Spice must complete activity I before starting activity J. So if we come up here, what we're saying is that she needed to complete activity I before starting activity J. So that, remember, means that we're starting at 14 and we're adding 6. 14 plus 6, that got us to 20. And that's exactly what we read here. It says, Scary Spice must complete activity I on day 20. So activity I on day 20. So Scary Spice will complete activity I on day 20. So again, 14 plus 6 means she completes it on day 20. And then she comes up to J, and that takes another 5 days. So that means we go 20 plus 5 is 25 days all up, and that's what we continue to read. By that time, activity H would be complete. So activity H, so remember activity H is up here. Activity H is now complete. Activity J is ready to be done, which takes that extra 5 days, which brings us to 25. By that time, activity H would be complete, and Scary Spice would be free to complete activity J. Activity J will be complete after 25 days. Therefore, the Spice Girls take 25 days to be ready for their concert. Again, that is a bit of a doozy of a question. So hopefully this has helped, but this is, again, a tricky question. So I don't want you to be too discouraged if you kind of watched this and you said, Mr. Scrooge, you might have well has been speaking gibberish just then. That made no sense at all. Come speak to me if you want a better understanding of this question. We can go through it again a bit more, but hopefully this video has been helpful.